happened to myself and my colleagues in Iraq in 2004. I think you'll enjoy it in a strange way. Seems kind of self-indulgent to invite you guys to celebrate the birth of my magazine and then show you a movie starring me about me. It doesn't get any better than that. What I will do is say that every time we've shown this in the past, there's usually a sort of a shocked silence afterwards, and people need to sort of cleanse their palate. And they've got lots of questions. How did you get out? Various things, who saved you, that kind of thing. So what I'm happy to say is that we took that in mind, put all the information in one book, which is conveniently available for sale when you go out tonight, along with the new book, which we're going to launch a little bit later on. The second portion of tonight's agenda is, of course, the book launch. This book, Unreconciled Differences, Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, is something which is a delicate subject. There's some people here in the room that know an awful lot about it, and others who probably couldn't find a lot of these places on a map without some direction. So I'm going to play a short video clip. This is what they call a video synopsis. We're going to show you some of the visuals, talk about some of the issues that are contained in the book, and hopefully intrigue you into actually buying and reading it.
During the past century, there have been two major clashes in the Anatolia-Caucasus region, both resulting in the widespread slaughter and forced expulsion of innocent civilians from all sides. The first occurred when the strain of the Great War caused the collapse of both the Ottoman Empire and Tsarist Russia.
This is something which, if you look at the time frame of what was taking place at the end of World War I, at one point in time, allied with the Russians, the Armenians have been very successful in taking a large chunk of Anatolia. When the Tsarist regime collapsed and the Bolshevik Revolution took place inside Russia, the Russian armies disintegrated and began to wage war against each other back in the homeland. That allowed the Turks to become resurgent and to retake a lot of the territory from the Armenians. People want to apply the word genocide to a lot of things, and there is a sort of strict set of guidelines to determine whether or not a genocide label can be affixed from the Geneva Convention. And a lot of countries, in particular Britain, has looked at the events of 1915, the mass deportation of Armenians from the regions of Eastern Anatolia, and said that no, what in fact transpired was horrific, it was a tragedy, but it does not constitute using the word genocide to describe it. Subsequently, the Bolsheviks were able to also annex and gain control of Azerbaijan and Armenia, and from that point forward, under the ruthless sort of communist regime, they were able to keep those inter-ethnic hatreds from bubbling over.
The second conflict erupted between 1988 and 1994 when the disintegration of the Soviet Union left a temporary power vacuum in the Caucasus, and the new republics of Azerbaijan and Armenia battled over the sovereignty of Nagorno-Karabakh.
I think our education system, particularly during the Cold War, failed us in that we didn't look into the Soviet Union in any degree. I mean, what we looked at was there was a huge entity, usually in red on a map, and a little dot called Moscow was the capital, and that's about all we had to know. We didn't realize, I mean, all these different republics that were included and the different ethnic diversity and issues that they had between them. I mean, the collapse of the Soviet Union created problems throughout all of its fringes of its empire when it collapsed, and all the old simmering ethnic hatreds that had been suppressed through the iron fist of communism came back to the surface. And in that vacuum that you had now, suddenly you've got munitions and weapons galore. I mean, people, there was no control, no law, and these regions that had been disputed territorially for centuries were now reignited. And the hatred that came to the fore was akin to what we saw in Yugoslavia. I mean, people from the neighboring villages, I mean, waging war and the ethnic cleansing that took place, where you don't just force a man from his home, you destroy his home, you poison his well and kill his livestock to drive him out and to keep him out. That sort of thing was completely, lack of understanding from us in the West. It was underreported. I mean, it wasn't completely unreported, but it was underreported and certainly largely misunderstood. We didn't understand the background behind it, and we still don't. I think that's the key here, is that we don't maintain any diplomatic relations with any of the countries in the Caucasus. And we're having politicians now determining, saying this word, genocide, needs to be applied to that event, something which happened 95 years ago. Who are these politicians to determine, through passings of law, what actually occurred? It's up to historians to determine how history is written, and it should be always a bringing together of both sides, this reconciling of the differences that occur, because of course the propaganda by both sides is so wide and so divergent that it creates people to technically go against human nature and kill each other.
Difficult to tell that complicated a story in a short film. It's also difficult to tell it in a short book. I'm not going to pretend that Unreconciled Differences is going to be the full-on history of what happened. Basically, the book is explaining why we know so little about it, posing some questions about what was happening, putting some context on events concerning the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the collapse of Tsarist Russia, these power vacuums that happened, and how difficult it is for historians to even delve through the archives. People say, what the hell is Canadian Military Magazine doing covering that? Well, who knows where the Canadian soldiers are going to end up next? Who would have thought we would have ended up in Afghanistan? In fact, when our magazine started in 1989, it was the Russians who were in Afghanistan fighting a war that eventually they could not win. And they're here tonight, they've supplied the vodka. And I think that's important that this group here tonight represents, we've seen it before. We have propaganda. We demonized the Germans twice in the last century when we were fighting them. Then they became our good allies during the Cold War. So that's being said, is the more we research, and hopefully as journalists covering current events, we can keep those differences from becoming too wide. Okay? Samvol, Ghibli. Let the meeting begin.